It was just another day at the dealership, or so I thought. I had been working there for years, helping to grow the business, and I was excited to sit down with my brother. He had recently taken over as the new owner, and I was hoping we would discuss the future, how we could take the dealership to the next level, how I could continue to contribute to its success. But when I walked into his office, expecting a conversation about strategy or plans, the words he said next shattered everything. "I'm letting you go," he said without hesitation. I froze. For a moment, I didn't understand. The words didn't register. I thought it must have been some sort of joke, but the look on his face told me otherwise. There was no warmth, no familiarity, just cold business. I couldn't breathe. This wasn't how I imagined this conversation going. We were family. We were supposed to be partners. How could he do this? How could he just throw me out like I was any other employee? The world seemed to tilt beneath me, and the air in the room grew thick. Every memory of working together, every sacrifice made, seemed to dissolve in that instant. I thought I knew. Him, I thought we were a team. But in that moment, I realized I had been wrong. "I'm letting you go," he repeated, his voice distant, as if this was all just another business decision to him. I couldn't process it. I couldn't fathom it. The man I trusted most had just taken everything from me. We had grown up together, side by side, learning the ropes of the family dealership. From an early age, our father had instilled in us the importance of hard work, dedication, and loyalty to the business. The dealership wasn't just a company to us, was our legacy. It was something our father had built from the ground up, something that meant everything to our family. And as his sons, we had always felt a deep connection to it, believing that one day we would continue to grow and lead it together. My brother and I had worked together through thick and thin, supporting each other through every challenge. We shared the highs and lows of running a family business, the long hours, the difficult decisions, and the pride that came with every success. Over the years, we became more than just business partners. We became a team. Brothers bound by a shared vision and a mutual respect for what we had built. Even when our father fell ill, we both stepped up to ensure the dealership continued to run smoothly. I had always trusted him, believed in him, and felt that we would be able to navigate whatever came our way together. But when he became the owner, everything started to change. I had always assumed that once he took the reins, we would continue to work as a team. After all, we had spent our entire lives building this business, supporting one another, learning from one another. I expected more collaboration, more partnership, not the cold distance that had begun to creep in after his promotion. I never imagined that the bond we had would suddenly break, that the trust we had built would be shattered without warning. I thought we were on the same page, but it turned out I was mistaken. What I had believed to be an unshakable partnership had become something else entirely. In the months leading up to his promotion, I began to notice small but significant changes in him. At first, I didn't think much of it, just the normal stress that comes with taking on more responsibility, I assumed. But as time passed, I couldn't ignore the shifts in his behavior. He seemed more distant, more focused on numbers and profit, margins, than on the people who had helped build the business. Our conversations, once frequent and filled with ideas for the future, became fewer. When we did speak, the discussions had less to do with our shared vision and more to do with spreadsheets, sales targets, and bottom lines. I began to speak with a sense of urgency, but it wasn't about the people or the relationships we had spent years cultivating. It was about how we could cut costs, increase revenue, and streamline operations. It wasn't just the business talk. It was his attitude. The brother I had worked beside for years, the one who understood the heart and soul of our dealership, was becoming someone else. Someone less focused on the people who made the business run smoothly, and more on the cold, hard numbers. I tried to brush it off at first, thinking it was just the weight of his new role, the pressure to perform. Everyone reacts differently to responsibility, I told myself. But deep down, I began to wonder if something more was shifting. Was it just stress, or was he beginning to lose sight of what really mattered to him? As much as I tried to ignore the signs, the nagging feeling inside me grew stronger. The distance between us wasn't just physical, it was emotional too. I began to question whether the brother I had known all these years was still there, or if this new version of him was something I wasn't ready to face. I walked into his office, expecting a conversation about the future, about how we would continue to work together to grow the dealership, to build on what our father had started. I had spent years by his side, believing that our bond, our partnership would carry us forward into the next chapter. We had built this business together, and I thought that no matter what, we were in this together. But when I walked into his office, the air felt different. He didn't greet me with the usual warmth. Instead, he looked at me with a cool, almost distant expression. I noticed how his gaze avoided mine, as if he was preparing for something difficult to say. Then he spoke the words I never thought I'd hear, "I'm letting you go." My heart sank, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. The shock hit me like a tidal wave, and I stood there, frozen, unable to process the gravity of what he had. Jess said, "I thought it was a joke, maybe a misunderstanding." But no, the coldness in his tone told me everything I needed to know. The brother I had worked beside for years, the one I had trusted with everything, our business, our dreams, our family legacy, had just turned his back on me. There were no explanations, no apologies, just a simple, heartless decision to sever the bond we had built. It felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. I couldn't comprehend what was happening. How could he do this? How could he betray everything we had worked for, everything we had shared? In that moment, it wasn't just a job I was losing. It was my family, my place in the world, and the trust I had placed in him. I was left standing there, unable to speak, unable to process the reality of what had just happened. I walked out of that office in a daze, my legs heavy, each step feeling more disconnected from reality. My mind couldn't process what had just happened. I had dedicated my life to that dealership, to helping it grow from the ground up. It wasn't just a job to MIT was ours. It was something I had poured my heart into for years, something I had believed in, something I thought we were building together. But now, I was being tossed aside without so much as an explanation. There was no discussion about my performance, no conversation about the future of the business. It was just a cold, final decision. The betrayal wasn't just the act of being fired, it was the lack of respect, the absence of any consideration. For everything I had given to the company, to him, my phone buzzed with calls from colleagues and friends, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. What was I supposed to say? I didn't even know how to explain it to anyone, let alone myself. How could I put into words the overwhelming sense of abandonment I was feeling? How could I explain that the brother I had trusted, the one I had built a future with, had just discarded me? I didn't feel angry at first. I felt nothing. The numbness swept over me like a fog, blocking out every emotion except confusion and disbelief. I wasn't just fired from a job, I was abandoned. The partnership we had built, the trust we had shared, was gone. Just like that, I didn't know how to face the world anymore. The silence in the aftermath was deafening, the weight of it pressed on my chest, suffocating any thoughts of moving forward. I couldn't even begin to process what had just happened, let alone figure out what came next. That night, I sat alone in the quiet of my home, trying to make sense of the devastation. That had just turned my world upside down. The walls felt like they were closing in on me, and my mind was racing, replaying every moment. Every conversation with my brother, trying to figure out where it had all gone wrong. How had everything come to this? I had given everything to that dealership, every ounce of energy, every sacrifice, every moment I could have spent with friends or family, I had poured into that business. I had believed in it, in us, with all my heart. And yet in return, I was left with nothing. No explanation, no closure. Just a cold decision that severed everything I had worked for, everything I had built. I wanted to scream. I wanted to punch the walls, to throw something, anything, just to release the hurt that was drowning me. The anger surged through me, mingled with the crushing weight of betrayal. It wasn't just the job, it wasn't just the business it was the years of trust, the bond between us, the shared dreams. All of it had been ripped away in one instant. I couldn't escape the pain. But instead of doing anything, I sat there in silence, feeling more lost than I ever had before. My mind wouldn't stop spinning. How could my own brother, someone I had trusted above anyone else, do this to me? How could he be so callous, so indifferent to everything we had built? The silence was suffocating. It was a stark contrast to the noise of the dealership, to the energy we had once shared as a team. Now it was just me, alone, with only the weight of the betrayal pressing down on my chest, and the realization that I had been left to pick up the pieces of a life I no longer recognized. The next morning, I woke up in an empty house, the silence heavier than I had ever felt it before. The bed was cold, the walls unfamiliar. Everything felt foreign now. Nothing felt like it belonged. The world outside had continued on, but inside, everything had come to a standstill. I lay there for what felt like hours, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of the chaos that had erupted in my life. My brother had taken the dealership, yes, but it wasn't just the business I had lost. He had taken away my sense of purpose, my place in the world. 4 years I had worked side by side with him, building something meaningful, something I thought was ours. But now, I felt like an outsider in my own life, a stranger in the house we had once shared so much of. I didn't know where to go from here. The future I had envisioned was no longer mine. All the plans we had made, all the dreams we had shared, had been stripped away in an instant. What was I supposed to do now? How could I move forward when everything I had built my identity on had been taken from me? My future had been flipped upside down, and I was left in the rubble, unsure of what came next. It wasn't just about the job, it was about the loss of everything I had tied myself to. I was no longer a part of the dealership. I wasn't a part of his world anymore. And the isolation that followed was suffocating. I couldn't even escape. The silence in my own head? I felt completely alone, unsure of where to turn, unsure of what my next step would be. The foundation I had once stood on had been ripped out from under me, and now all I had was the emptiness that filled every corner of my life. I couldn't just let it go. I couldn't walk away from this, from him, without confronting him, without understanding how he could betray me so completely, how he could destroy everything we had worked for. He was my brother, my partner, my family. The trust between us had been the foundation of everything. I needed to know why it had crumbled so easily. So I decided to meet him, to face him. I couldn't let this go without hearing him out, no matter how painful it would be. I walked into his office, my heart racing, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was walking into a lion's den. There was no warmth, no acknowledgement of what we had shared. He barely looked up when I entered, his face already set in that familiar businesslike expression. "Why?" I asked, my voice shaking, the weight of the question bearing down on me. "How could you do this to me? To our family?" He paused for a moment, as though he was weighing his response. But when he finally spoke, his words cut through me like a knife. "It's a business decision," he said flatly, as if that was all the justification he needed. His tone was cold, distant, like this was just another transaction to him. Nothing personal. Nothing personal. The words echoed in my mind, and I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After everything we had been through, after everything we had built together, he could say it was nothing personal? As if our relationship, our shared history, didn't matter. It was all about the business, the numbers, the cold, hard facts. His response was so chillingly indifferent, so dismissive of everything I had invested, that it left me speechless. I wanted to scream, to shake him, to make him understand the depth of the hurt he had caused. But I couldn't. The reality of it hit me all at once. I was talking to a stranger. The brother I once knew, the person I trusted above all else, was gone. I left his office feeling empty, like I had just lost the last connection I had to everything that mattered. There were no answers, no remorse, just business. In the months that followed, the road to healing felt long and uncertain. I had to face the reality that I could no longer define myself by the dealership, by my brother, or by the shared future we had once planned. It wasn't easy. Every step felt like a struggle, like climbing a mountain I wasn't sure I could reach the top of. But little by little, I started to take small steps toward rebuilding. I reached out to old friends, the ones I had neglected over the years because I had been so wrapped up in work, so focused on the business. They had always been there, but I had drifted away, lost in the pursuit of something I thought was permanent. Reconnecting with them brought back a sense of comfort, of belonging, that I hadn't realized I'd lost. Their support was invaluable, and it reminded me that I wasn't alone in this. I also turned my attention to personal projects I had put aside for far too long. Hobbies, passions, ideas, things I had abandoned in the wake of my dedication to the dealership. I found myself rediscovering parts of me that I had forgotten about. Things that made me feel alive, things that weren't tied to anyone else's expectations. With each step I took, I felt a little more like the person I used to be, before everything had fallen apart. It wasn't easy. There were still moments of doubt, moments when the pain resurfaced, like an old wound that wouldn't heal. I still found myself questioning everything, wondering if I had made the right choices, if I could ever fully trust anyone again. But even through those moments, I realized that I was stronger than I had given myself credit for. Each day was a victory, no matter how small. Slowly, the weight of the betrayal began to lift. It started to see a future that didn't rely on my brother or the dealership. I was beginning to shape a new future, one where I could stand on my own, where I could trust myself again, and where I could be proud of who I was becoming. I wasn't where I wanted to be yet, but I was on my way. And that was enough. Looking back, I realized that being let go was the best thing that could have happened to me. At first, it felt like the end of the world. It was the hardest thing I had ever experienced, and I couldn't see how I could move forward. But in time, I began to understand that it forced me to confront who I was outside of the dealership, outside of my brother's shadow. It made me take a hard look at my life and ask myself, who am I if I'm not part of this business? Realized that I had been defining myself by the company, by the role I played, by the expectations placed on me by my family. But I wasn't just the job I had. I wasn't just the brother, the worker, or the partner. I was more than that. Myself to become too wrapped up in a role that wasn't truly mine to own. I'm not defined by the company or by the family dynamics that had held me back. I am not my brother's shadow, nor am I bound by the past. What happened wasn't just a loss. It was an opportunity for me to rediscover myself, to reclaim my own worth, and to start building a life that was truly mine. Through this journey, I've learned to trust myself again. I've learned that my value doesn't come from external sources, it comes from within. I've learned not to settle for a life that doesn't honor my worth. And I've realized that I deserve to live authentically on my own terms. I am stronger than I ever thought I could be. What I thought was the end turned out to be the beginning of something far greater. My future is mine to shape, and for the first time in a long time, I feel free to build it the way I want. I have the strength, the confidence, and the clarity to walk forward, unburdened by the past, ready for whatever comes next. This is my new beginning.